Picture this, it's Christmas 1989. The tropical night of Panama City is violently torn apart by the deafening sound of Van Halen. US troops have surrounded the Vatican embassy, but instead of bullets, they are firing a relentless barrage of heavy metal music. The target, a single man hiding inside, sweating profusely, Manuel Noriega, the military dictator of Panama. But how did we get here? How did an American invasion turn into the most bizarre rock concert in military history? Let's rewind. To understand Operation Just Cause, we need to meet the man at the center of the chaos, Manuel Antonio Noriega. For decades, Noriega wasn't America's enemy. In fact, he was one of the CIA's most prized assets in Central America. During the Cold War, the US was terrified of communist expansion in Latin America. They needed a reliable middleman. Noriega was perfect. He was a ruthless intelligence officer who played all sides. He took millions from the CIA to provide information. Washington knew about his illegal side hustle, but for a long time, they simply looked the other way because he was their guy. By the late 1980s, however, the Cold War was ending, and the crack epidemic was exploding across American cities. Priorities shifted rapidly. Noriega was no longer a useful ally. He had become a massive political liability for President George H.W. Bush. In 1988, Noriega was indicted by U.S. courts for drug trafficking. The U.S. government demanded he step down, but he flatly refused. He even took to the streets, waving a machete and defiantly declaring that Panama would not be bullied by the American empire. Tensions reached a boiling point in December 1989 when Panamanian forces killed an off-duty U.S. Marine. The time for diplomacy was officially over. On December 20, 1989, President Bush unleashed Operation Just Cause. The objective was simple: dismantle the Panamanian Defense Forces and capture Noriega. This wasn't a small-scale raid. It was the largest American military deployment since the Vietnam War, involving over 27,000 U.S. troops. And to ensure absolute dominance, the Pentagon decided to test out the shiny new multi-billion-dollar toy in actual combat for the first time. Meet the F-117 Nighthawk, a stealth bomber that looked like an alien spaceship, completely invisible to enemy radar systems thanks to its jagged design. Two F-117s slipped silently through the night sky. Their mission to drop two massive 2,000-pound bombs near the Panamanian barracks to create mass confusion. But here is the funny part: the pilots missed their exact targets due to pilot error and poor weather, dropping bombs in an empty field. Still, the sheer deafening roar of the explosions successfully woke up every Panamanian soldier in the base, throwing the entire compound into absolute chaos. Simultaneously, the sky filled with American C-141 Starlifters and C-130 Hercules transport planes, flying incredibly low over the urban sprawl of Panama City. Thousands of U.S. Army Rangers and paratroopers leaped into the dark tropical night, their parachutes blooming like giant jellyfish descending upon key military targets. The operation was supposed to be a surgical strike, but the Panamanian Defense Forces didn't just roll over. They fiercely fought back in the streets. Fierce firefights erupted across the city. Tracer rounds lit up the sky like a deadly fireworks display, while civilians took cover in their homes. The U.S. military heavily relied on R-64 Apache helicopters, utilizing advanced thermal imaging to pinpoint and neutralize enemy positions hiding in the dense urban environment. Within 24 hours, the sheer overwhelming technological superiority of the American forces completely crushed the organized Panamanian military command. The defense collapsed. But there was one massive problem left on the checklist: the primary target of the entire invasion, Manuel Noriega himself, was nowhere to be found. He had slipped through the net and vanished into the chaotic streets of the city, sparking a massive, desperate manhunt by elite Delta Force operators. For 4 agonizing days, the United States military tore the sprawling urban maze of Panama City apart looking for Manuel Noriega. They even placed a massive $1 million bounty on his head, dropping wanted leaflets everywhere. Elite Delta Force and Navy SEAL teams raided his luxurious private mansions, finding bizarre things like voodoo altars and hidden bags of cash. But the dictator himself was a ghost. Noriega was absolutely terrified. He was constantly on the move, bouncing between dark underground safe houses, knowing the most powerful military machine on Earth was relentlessly hunting him down. But on Christmas Eve, as American troops rapidly tightened the noose around the city, Noriega made a desperate move that completely blindsided the Pentagon. He didn't flee into the dense tropical jungles to fight a guerrilla war. And he didn't try to escape the country on a hidden submarine. Instead, wearing a ridiculous disguise, he walked right up to the gates of the Apostolic Nunciature, the official embassy of the Vatican, and demanded political asylum. This was a brilliant, incredibly frustrating tactical move. Under international law, an embassy is considered the sovereign territory of its home country, protected by a diplomatic shield. If US forces simply kicked down the doors of the Vatican embassy, it would be a massive violation of international law, potentially triggering a global diplomatic nightmare with the Pope. General Maxwell Thurman, the fiercely aggressive American commander of the invasion, was absolutely furious. His heavily armored troops immediately surrounded the compound, but their hands were legally tied. A bizarre and tense standoff began. Inside, Noriega was given a tiny, sweltering room with no air conditioning, nervously drinking bitter coffee and waiting. Outside, heavily armed American soldiers stared blankly at the white walls, unable to fire a single bullet to capture their million-dollar target. The US military desperately needed a creative solution. If they couldn't physically drag him out, they would have to mentally break him. Enter the Psychological Operations Unit, also known as PSYOP. They specialized in breaking enemy morale without using lethal force. They noticed that while the embassy was protected by diplomatic immunity, sound waves don't care about international laws. Military trucks heavily loaded with equipment rolled up to the perimeter, deploying massive, concert-grade loudspeakers, aiming them directly at Noriega's bedroom window. The ultimate psychological siege was about to begin. On Christmas Day, the switch was flipped. A deafening wall of sound slammed into the Vatican embassy. The US military didn't just play random noise, they curated a very specific, highly sarcastic heavy metal playlist. This was officially dubbed Operation Nifty Package. The tracks included absolute bangers like Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, followed immediately by the heavy riffs of Panama by Van Halen, and the incredibly fitting I Fought the Law by The Clash. The PSYOP unit essentially turned into the most aggressive heavy metal radio station on the planet, blasting their psychological warfare mixtape. They even started taking song requests over the radio from the thousands of troops surrounding the compound, making the whole situation even more surreal. The volume was pushed to absolutely ear-bleeding levels, running 24 hours a day without a single pause, creating an inescapable sonic weapon. We are talking about decibel levels so incredibly high that it literally vibrated the solid concrete walls and threatened to shatter the stained glass windows. For the American soldiers stationed outside, the atmosphere shifted drastically. It felt less like a tense military siege and more like a bizarre, heavily armed tailgate party. They set up barbecues on the hoods of their Humvees, danced, and openly mocked the fallen dictator trapped inside, enjoying the ultimate concert. But for Manuel Noriega, it was sheer, uninterrupted psychological torture. Every single hour felt like an eternity inside that embassy. He was a man used to absolute power, now trapped in a sweltering tiny room, utterly unable to sleep, think, or escape the noise. His nerves were completely fraying after days of severe sleep deprivation, but there was a massive diplomatic flaw in this supposedly brilliant plan. The music wasn't just annoying Noriega, it was severely annoying the papal nuncio and the Vatican priests who also lived inside the compound. Word reached Rome. The Vatican called the White House, furiously complaining about the noise. Facing extreme embarrassment, President Bush ordered the Pentagon to turn the music off immediately. Suddenly, on December 29th, the deafening rock concert abruptly ended. The giant speakers were powered down, and a heavy, ringing silence fell over the Vatican embassy. But for Manuel Noriega, this sudden silence wasn't a relief, it was incredibly terrifying. Without the distraction of Van Halen, he was left alone with his own paranoid thoughts in that sweltering, tiny room. He realized the bitter truth: no one was coming to rescue him. His military forces had completely collapsed days ago, and his former cartel allies wouldn't dare touch an American military perimeter. To make matters worse, the Vatican was rapidly losing patience. The papal nuncio, Monsignor José Sebastián Laboa, sat down with the dictator and gave him a harsh reality check. Laboa made it crystal clear that the embassy would not grant him permanent political asylum. The Pope was not going to protect a man deeply involved in international drug trafficking. The psychological pressure was mounting from the inside, but the physical pressure was also building from the outside. The US military had allowed thousands of Panamanian citizens to gather around the American barricades. These weren't his supporters. It was an angry mob of ordinary people who had suffered under his brutal dictatorship for years. They brought their own megaphones, chanting anti-Noriega slogans, banging pots and pans, and demanding he face justice. The dictator peered through the blinds of his window. Seeing his own people cheering for his downfall completely shattered what little remained of his ego. He was completely trapped. If he stayed, the Vatican would eventually force him out. If he ran into the crowd, the angry mob would likely tear him apart before the Americans could even arrest him. The mighty ruler of Panama had been reduced to a frightened, cornered mouse. On January 3, 1990, after 10 grueling days inside the embassy, Noriega finally broke. He put on his freshly pressed military uniform, perhaps trying to hold onto a final shred of dignity. On the evening of January 3, 1990, the heavy wooden doors of the Vatican embassy slowly creaked open for the last time. Manuel Noriega stepped out into the humid Panamanian night. He was clutching a thick Bible, looking incredibly small and pale under the harsh military floodlights. The once feared dictator, who had aggressively waved a machete and threatened the entire American empire just weeks ago, surrendered quietly without firing a single shot. Waiting outside were elite Delta Force operatives and heavily armed D agents. They quickly patted him down, slapped cold steel handcuffs on his wrists, and secured him. He was immediately pushed into a waiting Black Hawk helicopter, lifting off into the dark sky. The primary objective of Operation Just Cause was officially complete. However, while the mission was a rapid tactical success, the human cost of this bizarre military intervention was very real and remains heavily debated today. During the brief but intense invasion, 23 American soldiers lost their lives, and over 300 were wounded navigating the dangerous urban combat zones. On the Panamanian side, the numbers were far more devastating. The military forces suffered hundreds of casualties as their defensive command structure was completely obliterated. Tragically, civilian casualties were exceptionally high. Entire neighborhoods in Panama City, particularly the El Chorrillo district, were heavily bombarded and accidentally burned to the ground. International human rights organizations estimate that anywhere from hundreds to possibly over 1,000 Panamanian civilians died during the overwhelming technological assault. As the smoke finally cleared over Panama, Noriega was flown directly to a maximum security facility in Miami, Florida. He had just made unprecedented history. He officially became the very first foreign head of state to be captured by the United States military and brought to American soil for trial. In a highly publicized federal trial, the man who once worked intimately with the CIA was convicted on 8 severe counts, including international drug trafficking. He was swiftly sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. The dictator's luxurious lifestyle of mansions and millions was permanently replaced by a barren concrete cell. In the immediate aftermath, the United States quickly established a new, pro-American democratic government in Panama, permanently dismantling their military into a civilian police force. The invasion of Panama was over, but the political shockwaves were just beginning to spread across the globe. While the American public largely celebrated the swift victory, the international community was absolutely furious. On December 29, 1989, the United Nations General Assembly held a vote. They overwhelmingly condemned Operation Just Cause, officially labeling it a flagrant violation of international law and the sovereignty of an independent nation. The Organization of American States was equally outraged. Many Latin American countries felt a cold shiver down their spines, fearing that the United States was returning to its old days of gunboat diplomacy, freely invading smaller southern neighbors whenever it suited their interests. From a legal standpoint, the invasion was highly controversial. It wasn't authorized by the UN Security Council, nor was it a traditional act of self-defense. Instead, the White House justified the attack using a mix of reasons: protecting American lives, defending democracy, and combating international drug trafficking. This set a massive precedent. Operation Just Cause essentially became the ultimate blueprint for American warfare in the post-Cold War era. It proved that the US could use overwhelming, high-tech military supremacy, like stealth bombers and advanced night vision, to rapidly topple a foreign government and execute regime change with minimal American casualties. It was a terrifying display of unipolar power that perfectly set the stage for the massive Gulf War just a year later. Furthermore, the Pentagon used Panama to test a brand new media strategy, having learned a bitter lesson from the Vietnam War, where journalists freely roamed and filmed the harsh realities of combat. The military strictly controlled the press in Panama. Reporters were kept in designated pools and fed sanitized, approved footage, ensuring the war looked like a clean, heroic action movie on television. Finally, there was the elephant in the room, the Panama Canal. In 1977, the US had signed a treaty promising to hand full control of the vital canal back to Panama by the end of 1999. By removing the unpredictable Noriega, the United States guaranteed that this incredibly valuable geopolitical choke point would transition into friendly, stable hands. This ensured that billions of dollars in global trade could continue to flow smoothly between the oceans without the threat of a rogue military dictator holding the world's economy hostage. The mission was controversial, messy, and loud, but from Washington's perspective, Operation Just Cause had successfully secured the future of the Panama Canal. Fast forward exactly 10 years after the chaotic invasion. On December 31, 1999, the United States officially honored its diplomatic treaty. Full administrative and operational control of the Panama Canal was peacefully transferred to the Panamanian government, sparking massive, emotional celebrations across the entire nation. The gamble ultimately paid off. Today, Panama boasts one of the fastest growing, most stable economies in Latin America, thriving peacefully and uniquely without any standing military. But whatever happened to the man at the center of this entire global storm? The fallen dictator Manuel Noriega. After serving 2 long decades in a Florida federal prison, his legal troubles were far from over. In 2010, he was abruptly extradited to France to face charges for international money laundering. Shortly after, in 2011, he was extradited one final time, sent back to Panama to face justice for the horrific human rights abuses committed during his brutal regime. The man who once arrogantly challenged a global empire returned to the country he had terrorized. Not as a powerful dictator, but as a frail, defeated old man in a wheelchair. Noriega eventually died in a hospital in 2017 at the age of 83, taking decades of dark CIA history and cartel secrets directly to his grave. Looking back, Operation Just Cause remains one of the most bizarre, fascinating, and highly debated military interventions in modern history. It was a strange, chaotic conflict where futuristic stealth bombers shared the battlefield with relentless psychological operations powered by ear-bleeding heavy metal music. It successfully dismantled a corrupt narco state and secured a vital artery of global trade, permanently shifting the geopolitical landscape of the Americas. Yet, it also left deep, painful scars. The tragic civilian casualties and the blatant violation of sovereignty are wounds that the people of Panama still remember today. It is a perfect reminder that history is rarely black and white. It is often a complex, messy, and incredibly absurd gray area. If you found this bizarre chapter of military history as fascinating as we did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives. What chaotic historical event should we explore next? Let us know down in the comments below. Stay curious, and as always, thanks for watching. What chaotic historical event should we explore next? Let us know down in the comments below. Stay curious, and as always, thanks for watching.